Good morning and welcome back. I'm Megan, the K-2 ELA coordinator with CIPD, and today we're going to be reading another book called Verity by Janelle Cannon. Now, I want us to think about the strategies that we worked on last week because those reading strategies can be applied to this book as well. Does anyone remember what we talked about last week? Characters' actions. Remember, what does a character do, say, think, and feel? Those four things, when we're analyzing our character today, are going to come into play. But we're also going to be focusing our efforts on another reading strategy or skill. We're going to be looking at problem solution. Now, in most stories, there's always going to be a problem and some sort of solution. But in this story, there's going to be a very particular problem that we're going to be looking at that applies to our main character, Verity. Now, a problem is what goes wrong in the story. So looking at our characters' actions and how they impact the story, we're going to be able to identify what problem or what's going wrong for our character. By the end of the story, our character is going to hopefully have solved this problem or come up with a solution. Now, a solution is how the problem is fixed or solved. So an example of this would be, I spill my milk. That's a problem. I spill my milk all over the ground. Well, my solution is how I'm going to fix that problem. So I took paper towels and I wiped it up. That's going to be how I solve or fix my problem. That was a small example, and you can think of lots of problem and solution examples that are occurring in everyday life that you have. But in this story, our character is going to face a very specific problem that can't really apply to you or I. So let's get started reading and see what problem does Verity have and how does he solve it. On a small tropical island, the sun rose high above the steamy jungle. A mother python was sending her hatchlings out into the forest the way all mother pythons do. Grow up big and green as the tree's leaves, she called to her little yellow babies as they happily scattered among the trees. But Verity dawdled. He was proudly eyeing his bright yellow skin. He especially liked the bold stripes that zigzagged down his back. Why the hurry to grow up big and green, he wondered. Maybe some of the older snakes in the jungle could tell him. Verity ventured into the treetops to look for them. Umbles, Aggie, and Ribbon were lazing on some branches nearby. Verity peered at their droopy green bodies. It's not polite to stare, chided Aggie. Umbles burped and groaned. It's taken nearly 4 weeks for that last lizard to digest. I surely do like lizards, but lizards don't like me. Why don't you like lizards? Asked Verity. Don't interrupt, Umbles grumbled. Dear me, whined Aggie. If I don't shed soon, this itchy skin will drive me bananas. Verity tapped a tune with his tail as he waited to speak. Stop that, Verity. It makes me nervous, Ribbon complained. Besides, you'll never grow up to be properly green, always interrupting and constantly fidgeting. Verity couldn't imagine being in such a hurry to be like them, and he really wanted to keep his sporty stripes. Hoping to find snakes that weren't so boring, Verity slipped away. Dozer was snoring in a tree not far from the others. Hello, said Verity. Do you want to climb trees with me? I'm tired, Dozer growled. Go do a few laps around the jungle, okay? Verity's heart sank. Greens were not only lazy and boring, they were rude. At the top of a very tall tree, Verity gripped one branch with his tail and another with his little snake jaws. I will never be lazy, boring, or green, he thought. I will jump and climb and keep moving so fast, I will stay yellow and striped forever. Then Verity let go. From a distance, the green watched. Oh my, they chorused. Ribbon shook his head. At this rate, he'll be lucky to make it to his first molt. Aggie nodded. He's likely to put out an eye on a branch. Umbles moaned. He may not live to turn green. But one day, Verity's skin began to peel, revealing a pale green stripe stretching along his whole body. He gasped. How can this be? I'm the speediest snake in the jungle and I'm still turning green. He raced down to the river, grabbing up a mouthful of rough leaves. Verity flung himself into the water. If I can't run this green off, I'll scrub it off, he thought. His frantic splashing caught the eye of a large bottom feeder cruising the murky depths. Yum, the old fish hummed. Lunch. Before the fish could haul Verity under, the frightened snake bit him on the nose. Pooh! With a blast of his rubbery lips, the great fish sneezed, sending Verity into the air. Slapping onto the soggy shore, Verity skidded out of reach. Phew, that was close, he sputtered. Every inch of his body was covered with wet, gloppy mud. Kinda lumpy, kinda brown. It sure beats being green. He left the mud on. But the soft brown muck dried into a hard gray shell, and Verity could barely move. If he even budged, the stuff cracked off in jagged chunks. As each piece fell away, Verity could see that his body was even greener than before. This is terrible, cried Verity. He pictured himself hanging around in droopy loops, itching and complaining and worrying all day like the old greens. He looked up into the sky where the sun blazed a beautiful yellow, just the color he used to be. Then he pulled a vine to the top of the tree. Launching himself from the treetop, Verity startled a flock of colorful birds. He became dizzy with delight. Sure, the bright sun and his lofty speed would turn him golden again. In his joy, Verity forgot he would fall back to earth. Whippity-wappity, flip-flop, wham! Plummeting through the tree, Verity landed in a crooked sprawl across a log on the forest floor. He couldn't move. Help! He croaked. As usual, the greens had been watching Verity's antics. They moved quickly to where he lay. Didn't we say it would come to this? Umble said, shaking his head. Aggie sighed. Lucky thing he's still got two good eyes. They gently lifted Verity up to a safer place where they could watch over him while he healed. Neatly splinted to a branch, Verity had no choice but to listen to the greens as they gabbed. Remember how I used to streak across the forest floor, Ribbon asked. Quick as lightning, answered Aggie, and I climbed giant trees like they were nothing. They grew taller then, you know. The things I dare to run down and swallow, Umbles bragged. Wild boar were no match for me. Verity was astonished. You used to run and climb and hunt giant pigs? What happened? Well, Ribbon crashed just like you, Aggie replied. I took a terrible fall and almost put an eye out. Then old Umbles here nearly choked to death. Now we all prefer the quiet life. A warm perch, a little sunshine, and an occasional good meal. The greens rambled on about their days of glory, and Verity settled in on his own branch. Finally, one afternoon, Umble said, Looks like you're ready to go again. He carefully untied Verity from the branch. You are welcome to come with us, said Aggie. Ribbon agreed. The three greens slipped quietly back into the forest. Verity wasn't ready to join them. He wasn't sure where he wanted to go, so he just stretched and stayed put until the sun went down. He listened to the forest come alive. Time passed. The sun and the moons took turns in the sky. Verity marveled at the full moon, grew thinner and thinner every night. Then he watched patiently as it slowly grew round again. He wondered why he hadn't noticed that before. Verity became so green that he blended perfectly with the leaves. He was so still that the other creatures walked right by without seeing him. One fine morning, as Verity basked in the sunshine, two small yellow snakes approached. They tapped and fidgeted as they stared. "Get a load of that old green guy," one of them whispered. "Do you think he ever moves?" The other snickered. "I seriously doubt it." "They're just like I used to be," thought Verity. "And now I am what I was afraid to be." He looked at his big green body and slowly smiled. "How would you like to climb trees with me?" he asked. "With you?" The yellows were astounded. "I'll even show you my fancy figure 8, Verity replied, though he was a little worried about putting his eye out. With practice, the three greens performed a perfect triple figure 8. Leaping and looping with his little striped friends, Verity laughed. "I may be big and very green, but I'm still me." The end. So now that we finished our awesome book, we're going to go back to our reading strategy focus for the day. So when we talked at the beginning of our story, we talked about identifying what goes wrong in our story, what's our problem, and then our solution. How is the problem in our story solved or fixed? So I'm going back to think about my character's actions and the things that Verity goes through in the beginning, middle, and end of our text. So what goes wrong in our story is that Verity does not want to turn green. And I know these things because of what he says and the actions that my character Verity takes to not turn green. And he wants to stay yellow, right? He says it, and he acts like that by covering himself in mud and trying to get eaten. He does not want to turn green, right? So the way he ends up solving his problem is through all of these actions throughout the story and of major events, he realizes that he can still be green and be himself, and that he can still do tricks and do all of the things that he liked to do when he was yellow, even though he's now green. So our problem is Verity does not want to turn green, and our solution is he learns that he can still be green and be himself. He can still do tricks. So when you're reading your independent reading book today, or you're doing work for class, I want you to be thinking about what problem or what goes wrong in my story. And once you identify that, I want your brain to be thinking about, okay, how is this problem going to be fixed or solved? And sometimes the solution is more obvious than others. And in this one, our character learns that his solution is something that he finds within himself. He accepts who he is and the snake, I should say, not person, that he is when he turns green. And then he can still be himself and do tricks and loops and be in the jungle just like he was when he was yellow. So next week, I hope you come back, read another story with me where we may look at another problem solution and continue to analyze characters like we did in the first week. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday. Bye.
Hey, welcome back. If you don't remember, I'm Mimi Antal. Last week we were talking about asking questions when we read to help with our comprehension. Today I brought someone along with me. This is Sherry Easton. Sherry, do you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Sherry Easton. I get the pleasure of working with Mimi Antal. We work on the English language arts stuff together. So today we thought I heard this great book that you were reading, so today I thought I would come and join Mimi.
Right. So, like I started to say, last week we were working on asking questions. If you remember, we asked questions in order to improve our comprehension. Now, I'm not sure if you remember what that means, but comprehension just means being able to really understand what we're reading. Today, we're going to continue that a little bit, but we're going to add on to it. So instead of just asking questions, we're going to also start answering. Sherry, you want to share some more?
Yeah, so one of the ways we're going to answer those questions is we're going to start to make some predictions, maybe based on what's happening or what a character says or does. So we'll start to make some guesses or some predictions as to what happens, and then we're going to make looking for the answers to those and seeing if our predictions are confirmed or denied. Doesn't matter if they're confirmed or denied, it just helps us to get ready to think about it.
So are you guys ready to make some predictions? Okay, so we'll go ahead and start reading again from the Watsons Go to Birmingham. Now, if you remember from last week, or even if you don't, I'll fill you in. The last time we were reading this book, we learned about this family. And in this family, the main character, whose name is Kenny, his brother is Byron, they're at home on a really cold night, and the conversation comes up about how they're going to go to their aunt's house in order to stay warm because they didn't have heat.
They don't have heat.
Right, so let's see what's happening today. It says here, it starts with, Dad went out to try to get the brown bomber started. That was what we called our car. It was a 1948 Plymouth that was dull brown and real big. Byron said it was turd brown. Uncle Bud gave it to Dad, and when it was 13 years old, and we had it for 2 years. Me and Dad took real good care of it, but some of the time it didn't like to start up in the winter. After 5 minutes, Dad came back in huffing and puffing and slapping his arms across his chest. Well, it was touch and go for a while, but the great brown one pulled through again. Everyone cheered. But me and Byron quit cheering and started frowning right away. By the way, Dad smiled at us. We knew what was coming next.
Oh no. This is a great place to make a prediction.
Okay, are you gonna make one?
I'm gonna make one. So I'm thinking, usually when your mom and dad, I remember when I was a kid when my mom would give me a look, I knew, my first thought was, am I in trouble? Is she gonna make me do something I don't wanna do? You know, those kind of things. So I'm predicting that they are maybe in trouble with Dad. Maybe Dad saw something in the car that you know, the kids messed up or something. So I'm gonna predict that maybe they're in trouble with Dad.
That's a really good prediction.
Yeah.
So listeners, do you see what she did? She's actually thinking about the text and thinking about what might happen next. I could definitely see how that's going to increase our understanding of what's happening in the text. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's continue to read. Dad pulled 2 ice scrapers out of his pocket and said, "Okay, boys, let's go out there and knock those windows out."
Okay, see, this is a great chance to look. So even if my prediction wasn't confirmed, is instead of being in trouble, now Dad's making him scrape the ice off the windows, which is the worst thing to ever have to do in the winter, right? But even still, it helps me to understand. Making that prediction still helped me to understand what's going on in the story. So the boys they knew that what Dad was going to come up with, so they probably have done this before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as we continue to read, listeners, I want you to start making your own predictions as I read, even if it's not in a spot where I stop. Okay, back to the text.
Okay.
We moaned and groaned and put some more coats on and went outside to scrape the car's windows. I could tell by the way he was pouting that Byron was going to try and get out of doing his share of the work. "I'm not going to do your part, Byron. You better do it. And I'm not playing either." "Shut up, Pump." I went out over to Brown Bomber's passenger side and started hacking away at the scab of ice that was all over the windows. I finished Mama's window and took a break. Scraping ice off of windows when it's that cold can kill you. I didn't hear any sound coming from the other side of the car, so I yelled out, "I'm serious, Byron, I'm not doing that side too. And I'm only going to do half the windshield. I don't care what you do to me." The windshield in the Bomber wasn't like the new 1963 cars. It had a big bar running down the middle of it, dividing it in half. "Shut your stupid mouth. I got something more important to do right now." Stop. You want to make a prediction?
I do want to make a prediction. Okay, so Byron is older. Byron's a teenager.
Right.
Okay, so I'm predicting that either he's clearly going to try to get out of the work. He's not scraped anything.
No, that's most of the teenagers I know.
Right, most teenagers are pretty, if you have older brothers and sisters, you probably know this, right? They don't like to do chores. So yeah, I'm thinking that Byron is definitely getting out of the work, and Kenny's going to find out that Byron didn't scrape off any of the ice on his side of the door.
Okay.
his side, I think.
So, listeners, have you made your prediction? Do you agree? What do you think? Okay, let's go ahead and go back to the story as we continue to read and understand. I peeked around the back of the car to see what Vi was up to. The only thing he'd scraped off was the outside mirror, and it was bending down to look at himself in it. He saw me and said, "You know what, Square? I must be adopted. There just ain't no way two folks as ugly as your mama and daddy could have given birth to someone as sharp as me."
Byron's a mess.
How did you do on that prediction?
I was pretty good on that prediction. That prediction was confirmed, probably.
He got out of work and he's in the mirror.
He's got out of work, yeah.
Okay, back to the text. He was running his hands over his head like he was brushing his hair. I said, "Forget you," and went back over to the other side of the car to finish the back window. I had half of the ice off when I had to stop again and catch my breath. I heard Byron mumble my name. I said, "You think I'm stupid? It's not going to work this time." He mumbled my name again. It sounded like his mouth was full of something. I knew this was a trick. I knew this was going to be How to Survive a Blizzard, Part 2. I don't really know what Blizzard Part 1 is.
Yeah, it sounds like it was almost something we should have read already, but...
Yeah. So, listeners, if you notice now that I'm thinking aloud again, I'm actually telling you what I'm wondering as I listen and as I read in the text. Let's go ahead and continue to read, and now that we've set that purpose, to see if we can figure out what Blizzard Part 1 was, maybe?
Yeah.
How to Survive a Blizzard Part 1. Oh, it's
right
look,
there. It's going to tell us.
So, How to Survive a Blizzard Part 1 had been last night when I was outside playing in the snow, and Byron and his running buddy, Buckhead, came walking by. Buckhead has officially been a juvenile delinquent even longer than Byron. "Say, kid," Vi had said, "you want to learn something that might save your stupid life one day?" I should have known better. But I was bored, and I think maybe the cold weather was making my brain slow. So I said, "What's that?" "We're going to teach you how to survive a blizzard." How?" Byron put his hand in front of his face and said, "This is the most important thing to remember. Okay?" "Why?" "Well, first we got to show you what it feels like to be trapped in a blizzard. You ready?" He whispered something to Buckhead, and they both laughed. "I'm ready." I should have known that the only reason Buckhead and Vi would want to play with me was to do something to me.
Yeah. I do have a prediction. I predict that they're going to bury him in the snow. Yeah.
You're saying that like that's almost happened to you before.
It has happened to me before. With an older brother.
Okay, so listener, let's continue to read and see if that prediction is correct. And once again, it would be nice if we could hear your predictions too, but I'm sure you're thinking of them. Back to the text. "Okay," Vi said. "First thing you gotta worry about is high winds." Byron and Buckhead each grabbed one of my arms and one of my legs and swung me between them going, "Woo! Blizzard warnings! Woo! Blizzard warnings! Take cover!" Buckhead counted to 3, and on the third swing they let me go in the air. I landed headfirst in the snowbank. Wow. Did you make that prediction? I kind of saw that one coming. But that was okay because I had on 3 coats, 2 sweaters, a t-shirt, 3 pairs of pants, 4 socks, along with a scarf, a hat, and a hood. These guys couldn't have hurt me if they'd thrown me off the Empire State Building. After I climbed out of the snowbank, they started laughing, and so did I. "Cool, baby bruh," Vi said. "You passed that part of the test with a B+. What you think, Buckhead?" Buckhead said, "Yeah, I give that little punk an A." They whispered some more and started laughing again. "Okay," I said. "Second thing you gotta learn is how to keep your balance in a high wind. You gotta be good at this so you don't get blown into a polar bear's skin." They put me in between them and started making me spin round and round. It seemed like they spun me for about a half an hour. When slobs started flying out of my mouth, they let me stop, and I wobbled around for a while before they pushed me back in the same snow. when everything stopped going in circles, I got up and we all laughed again. I wonder if I would laugh.
I don't know if I would either. It's funny now, but I don't know if I would laugh. It was
not at the time.
No.
They whispered some more, and then Vi said, "What you think, Buckhead?" He kept his balance a good long time. I'm going to give him an A-. I ain't as hard a grader as you. I'm going to give the little punk a double A-. Okay, Kim. Now the last part of surviving a blizzard. You ready? Yep. You passed the wind test, and you did real good on the balance test. But now we got to see if you're ready to graduate. You remember what we told you was the most important part about surviving? Yeah? Okay, here we go. Buckhead, tell him about the final exam. Buckhead turned me around to look at him, putting my back to Byron. Okay, Square, he started. I want to make sure you're ready for this one. You've done so good so far. I want to make sure you don't blow it at graduation time. You think you're ready? Okay. Any predictions?
It's gonna be rough. I think Byron and his friend are gonna try to really maybe throw snow right at him.
I don't know. I hope not.
I hope not too, but
Let's see what
there's
happens.
a lot of build up. The author's making us feel like really
Right?
intense.
Like
Yeah.
all of these little steps and
Yeah.
stages. So back to the text, it says, I nodded, getting ready to be thrown in the snowbank real hard this time. I made up my mind I wasn't going to cry or anything. I made up my mind that no matter how hard they threw me in that snow, I was going to get up laughing. Okay, Bucket said, everything's cool. Remember what your brother said about putting your hands up? Like this? I covered my face with my glove. Yeah, that's it. Buckhead looked over my shoulder at Byron and then said, Woo! High winds, blowing snow. Woo! Look out! Blizzards are coming. Death around the corner. Look out! Byron mumbled my name, and I turned around to see why his voice sounded so funny. As soon as I looked at him, Byron blasted me in the face with a mouthful of snow.
Oh no.
Man, it was hard to believe how much stuff Vi could put in his mouth. Him and Buckhead just about died laughing as I stood there with snow and spit and ice dripping off my face. Byron caught his breath and said, Aw, man, you flunked. You done so good that you go and flunk the blowing snow section of How to Survive a Blizzard. You forgot to put your hands up. What you say, Buckhead? F? Yeah, double F minus. It was a good thing my face was numb from the cold already, or I might have froze to death. I was too embarrassed about getting tricked to tell on them. So I went in the house and I watched TV.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a good stopping point
I do
for
too.
today.
I've been in that place though, because I have older brother and older sister, so I've been in that place where you've been too embarrassed that you fell for their tricks, that you can't even tell mom or dad because you don't want them to laugh, you just feel kind of...
And that's the cool thing about making predictions too, because oftentimes what you're doing, you're also making connections with your own life and your own experiences. And then also with what is in the text.
Right.
I think maybe next time that we come and we continue to read with the story, we'll actually start talking about how to confirm those predictions with evidence from the text.
From the text.
Yeah. Well, it was nice being with you all. This is Miss Mimi and
Miss Sherry.
Have a great week, you guys. Bye-bye.
Good morning, Kansas City. I'm Chris Odom. I'm your ELA coordinator, proudly sporting my hip-hop ed hat this morning because we're going to talk about poetry and tone and feature the work of Reggie Gaines and the performance skills of Lemon Anderson. I'm going to try to do that poem justice. If you know which one I'm talking about, it's called Please Don't Take My Air Jordans. It's a fantastic poem. We're going to use it as our grounds for discussion today, talking about tone. Poetry is a matter of life, not just a matter of language. Awesome Lucille Clifton poem. Quote, if you haven't heard of Lucille Clifton, again, somebody to look up after this is over. Okay, today we're going to talk about tone, a poem written by Reggie Gaines and often known to be performed by Lemon Anderson. Might go back and point out that this is he and I got to meet him when he came to Kansas City on his book tour. I was honored to have him come work in my classroom and taught some of our spoken word poets who were competing in the Louder Than a Bomb competition. So it was just a tremendous moment to see he and one of our known authors, Unique Hughley, working on their craft together. And I have photos from that, and I've been looking for them because those are really some amazing memories. You almost kind of have to prove it really happened. Okay, so today we're going to talk about tone, and we're going to hear me try to do best to that poem to perform it. Note it is written in dialect, so you might hear a voice that I did not write myself emerge, and that'll be an interesting thing as we try to interpret the poem itself and think about what its intended tone was, and if you hear me getting it right or wrong, even in the way that I say it. We're also going to annotate specific details from the poem and see if they help us place and just make this decision about the tone. Okay, tone is the author's attitude toward a topic or subject. We detect this actively as we read, watch, or listen something. It's based mostly on word choice because that's what authors use to paint and portray. The words that they choose are the most valuable and powerful in that situation. So the persona is often a piece that's part of a poem if it's narrative or if it explores the thoughts of maybe an inner character that aren't just the poet, but a voice that the poet is personifying, and that's where the word persona is based. Okay, the feel of a piece of writing is also sometimes considered the tone, and that's often considered whether the language is formal, informal, serious, or casual. You've probably heard those words associated when people have used words like tone. If you're taking a casual tone with someone, you probably know them and they're very familiar. Family or somebody that you see all the time. If you take a more formal tone, maybe you're sitting in a business opportunity like a job interview or having an important phone call with somebody that you are working with, like in any kind of a business situation. So oftentimes tone comes up in a variety of ways. Today we're going to really explore what it has to do with poetry. Okay, there are often words like amused or compassionate or energetic, lighthearted, callous, childish, cold, bitter, or critical. These are words that sometimes if you take a critical tone, the critical doesn't always mean bad, but it might be that you came in kind of as a skeptic and had to be proven otherwise. Okay, so mood is another good word related to tone. Not the same word and really not the same thing. Mood is more so the emotional color, the feeling that it gives off, the overall sense of what everyone else is kind of feeling together. And that's slightly different than tone because the mood happens more so on the audience's side. The tone happens more that the author was there to construct and build into the piece that they created. So let's try it. Today I'm going to try to do my best to read a poem that I consider pretty legendary. And one reason that I might have selected it is certainly that when we go back to school, we're concerning ourselves an awful lot with what's on our feet. Part of going back to school for me, and I know a lot of students across this country, was always a fresh chance to think about if I was going to get a pair of shoes that I would be proud of, how they would kind of represent or define me. I can remember when Jordans first hit the floor in school. Not exactly sure what grade I was in. It was probably 8th grade. And some of the people that I knew that started to have them, I've honestly never owned a pair and wasn't really buying shoes that cost quite that much at the time. And instead, I remember the first pair that I bought that were some Nikes, I bought some Flights. And so, those are still pretty cool, but they by no means are as legendary as Jordans. Okay, so this is Please Don't Take My Air Jordans by Reggie Gaines. My Air Jordans cost $100 with tax. My suede starter's jacket says Raiders on the back. I'm styling, smiling, looking real mean, 'cause it ain't about being heard, just being seen. My leather Adidas baseball cap matches my fake Gucci backpack. There's nobody out there looks as good as me. The gear costs money, it sure ain't free. And I got no job, no money at all. It's easy to steal fresh gear from the mall. Parents say I shouldn't, but I know I should. Gots to do what I can to make sure I look good. And the reason I have to look real fly, well, to tell you the truth, man, I don't know why. I guess it makes me feel special inside. When I'm wearing rush gear, I don't have to hide. But I really must get some new gear soon, or my ego will pop like a 10-cent balloon. Security's tight at all of the shops. Every day there's more and more cops. My crew's laughing at me 'cause I'm wearing old gear. School's almost over and summer is near. I'm sporting torn Jordans and need something new. There's only one thing left to do. Cut school Friday, catch the subway downtown. Check out my victims just hanging around. Maybe I'll get lucky and find easy prey. Gots to get some new gear, there's no other way. I'm ready and wildin', I'm packing my gun. This is serious business, it sure ain't no fun. But I can't have my posse laughing at me. I'll cop something dope, just wait, you'll see. Cut out the station West 4th near the park. Brothers shooting hoops where someone remarks, "Hey Holmes, where'd you get them deaf Nikes?" As I say to myself, I likes them, I likes. They were Q-tip bright and blinded my eyes. The red emblem of Michael looked as if it could fly. Not one spot of dirt, the air's brand new. Had my pistol, I knew just what to do. Followed him very closely behind. Waited until it was just the right time. Made a left on Houston, pulled my gun and screamed, "Give me them Jordans." And he tried to run. Took off as fast, but he didn't get far. I fired, pow, he fell between two parked cars. He was coughing, crying, blood dripped on the street. And I snatched them Air Jordans right off his feet. While laying there dying, all he could say, "Please, don't take my Air Jordans away." You think you'd be worried about staying alive. As I took off with the Jordans, there were tears in his eyes. The very next day, I bopped into school with my brand new Air Jordans. Man, I was cool. I killed to get them, but hey, I don't care. 'Cause now, I need a new jacket to wear. And that's that piece. That is a controversial poem to throw at you in a school conversation. But it's also pretty amazing to think about the tone. So let's use it as an avenue to really have this talk about what that poem just was about. And if I got anywhere near what Reggie Gaines was trying to do when he created it. Okay, so what do you think the topic was? I'm going to let you just kind of think on that for a minute. What exactly came up in this poem? What exactly happened in this poem? Why might the author have decided to portray the actions that he did in this poem? Okay. Now, if we were to read this poem again, or had it on a piece of paper, we would, when you were in my class, we would certainly look at it a second time through, and we would probably even read it out loud a second time through. And this time, we would be asking a different question. We would be asking the question of what is the author's attitude toward the topic? What does that tell you? How did the author treat this topic? There was a storyline. Something pretty brutal happened. It's a part of life that we know. It's a part of life that we don't know, depending on who we are. Did we decide to think about that based on our own experiences with this topic? And then that's probably part of what we were thinking while we were interpreting what the poet and his attitude was toward a topic of this nature. There are some very challenging lines, but some amazing revelations that come out of them. Let's look at a couple and explore those together. Be thinking about the author's attitude. I'm going to tell you what I think when I heard it and I've read it, and every time I hear a little more in a little different way. Okay, so let's think about the details that helped us discover the attitude of the author or the speaker of the poem. And when I'm thinking about it, I am staying with the thought that it seemed like we were questioning things. We were questioning our practices, we were questioning our beliefs, we were questioning the need to portray ourselves in certain ways. But I also think we're questioning, how do a pair of shoes hold this much power? And are they in fact this magical? And the respect that I have for them as a cultural icon, it bleeds through. So I am moved by the fact that there's such a neat piece of art connected to such a neat and legendary creation in our world. I also lived a time where I did know people who really got hurt for a pair of shoes, and how complicated that can become when really shoes are something that you use and not so much collect for a lot of other people. It's really an interesting possibility to really just go into this discussion about shoes and various approaches to them, right? And various needs that people satisfy. I absolutely love shoes. Will not lie that I don't. It's a bad thing for me to go to a shoe store because they are designed with me in mind, and I love all the colors and different ways that you might express yourself just on your feet. Might have to end up someday with a pair of Jordans, but I better hurry up. They seem to be pretty pricey. Okay, so did you select any of these lines? It ain't about being heard, just being seen. Does that sound like perhaps the tone of questioning? Really, is that what's going on with the pair of shoes? And the reason I have to look real fly, well, to tell the truth, I don't know why. Again, it's probably a little insightful on my part, read it a lot of times, but I hear a form of questioning in the tone and the attitude that the author might be taking with this poem. I think he probably loves Jordans too and has this admiration and respect for what they mean in the culture, but I imagine it's also paired with some concern for the violence that happens in this poem, and it's an interesting mixture that way. So if you looked at any of these other lines, I think you could draw your own conclusion of what was the author saying and how did I decide the attitude they had toward this specific topic. I hope this has been some help to you, because tone is one of those mysterious things. It gets us on all kinds of questions when we try to take tests, because there's an extra layer of making sense of what we're reading. So one question to follow with is, there must be a reason the poet wrote this poem the way he has. And behind that might be his attitude toward the topic, or we might be reading an awful lot into it that was never intended. The fun thing is to speculate and guess, and then you're really doing what's called literary analysis and criticism. So, what was he trying to get the reader to think about? I'll leave you to think about that together. Find this poem online if you want to take another look. Again, it's originally written by Reggie Gaines and performed often on YouTube by Lemon Anderson, and it's called Please Don't Take My Air Jordans. Remember, tone is a complicated thing. It kind of is when you start to explain its complexity, but we can all sense that it's there, and so that means we can all explain it if we try. Now that you know what it means when they ask you to find the tone of a passage, I hope you'll want to do so. Have a great day. Thanks for joining me. Good morning, Kansas City. My name is Chris Odom. I'm your ELA coordinator from the Kansas City Public Schools. Today we're going to talk again about the writing process and collecting reliable information on your topic. Student inquiry model is what we're following, where students would come up with a topic of interest. We did that last session, and I'm going to feature again my same research question about my crazy new dog. His name is Shadow, and he's a blue heeler. So let's go on. I'm going to show you how I decided information I found was reliable and accurate and trustworthy. Okay, today we're going to talk about credibility. It's a big word, and it's an important word today, so that you could think about who's an expert and how they became that person and why you should trust what they say. Another thought is that we'll talk about what is a reliable source. We'll also have a modeling session where I'm going to show you how I use the SOAP strategy, and I call it SOAPS. Oftentimes it's used in literature class, but I know a great way you can use it to study nonfiction and make sure the resource material and research that you're doing is top-notch and highly trustworthy. Okay, so that's the final thing we're going to do, is ask you to go off and find a source of your own based on your research question from last time, or if you develop one right here today, then I want you to find a source that you think is trustworthy and highly reliable for reasons you can say why. Okay, to start off, defining credibility. Credibility might start with a question. What makes someone an expert? What makes things that you do something that you would feel like you could explain to other people? Do you have an ability that other people might come to you for because you know how to do it better than they do? What about in your family? Are particular people expert in specific things. I have heard a lot of people that I know who have people in their family who can help them fix things. And that's a huge, huge asset when you have to call a plumber and you don't know one yourself. Plumbers are extremely expensive. So sometimes it's pretty amazing when you feel like you have the trust of someone that you know nearby and they're an expert. Sometimes you have to pay for experts. And in that case, you want to make sure that you're getting what you pay for and that you can decide that the person is truly an expert. It has a lot to do with research, but it has also a lot to do with being a customer in today's world. Okay, so how do we know who to listen to or not? A big challenge you find today online are in a lot of different social media threads. A lot of people consider them to be very expert, and sometimes it doesn't seem like they've done their research themselves. We find this on issues that involve politics, race, money, some of the biggest topics in the world. So again, you as a student need to know how you could go about your day-to-day life and make decisions about what you should trust and what you should put, let's say, in your research paper as accurate and reliable. There are ways that we can decide people are experts. This guy right here, he certainly is dressed in the right way with the right goggles. He's in the right setting. It looks like he's surrounded by a business in a place of employment. I can even see with his posture that it seems like he's done this before. But what would be nice is for me to ask, do you have a certificate? And are you a licensed mechanic under the guidelines that are set ahead? That way when I take my car to him, I'll know that whatever he's doing, I can actually come back to him for, and he will stand by it. And I will be something I can trust. Because I know that he has proven himself and his trustworthiness in his ways of experience. He probably has some form of certification to be a licensed mechanic, and in order to do that, he took a path of education. There's other ways you can become an expert in topics, and they often have to do with an experience someone else might not have had that you did. Think about if you were going to be in the newspaper. Maybe you were there for an event where other people were not. Maybe you have a special way of seeing it based on an experience or a way you grew up. Oftentimes people are featured on interview panels for a lot of those very reasons. So think about, again, what's your goal? If you're going to be in an essay someday and somebody's going to quote you, why would they put you in there? Okay, here's a great strategy that I'm going to ask you to start thinking about that we can use. Not this one. This one's kind of funny. And again, I pulled it off the internet to show you there's a lot of weird stuff out there that if this was a strategy, the people in their 20s are anarchists, the people in their 30s are hippies, and the people in their 40s drive BMWs. Well, that's an interesting thing. So again, this isn't a document that I would necessarily trust. It's something I would find online that I would again wonder where it came from. And that's where we're going to look at today. So the speaker, when you're looking at a resource or a piece of text evidence that you would want to include in your research paper, the first thing you're going to think about is the speaker. And if we were asking Oprah Winfrey, we might just go ahead and decide that she is an expert and believe a lot of things because we know what Oprah Winfrey means. It's a national, international name to hear Oprah Winfrey. When people say that, something reminds them of who that person is immediately, and they know of all of her years of experience and all the work that she's done just in those two words. Probably no person more known sometimes when we think about her success and what she really has promoted throughout her lifetime. So we could think about, again, unless it was Oprah, we need to ask these questions. And even when it's Oprah, we should still ask these questions. What makes this person an expert? How long did they start in this field as expert? And I would say as an expert, she's an expert journalist, right? The news and stories that she was able to cover and discussions that she brought out of her show and continues to do with interviewing people, you can see her expert skill as a journalist. And journalists are interesting in that they interview other experts and bring out their skills. So Oprah's an interesting example of a person who is an expert in bringing out the expertise of other people. Okay, the next thing you would talk about is the occasion. When you look at anything you find online, it has an original time it appeared, and it has an original place. It's a good thing to know. A lot of things are pulled back from some other resource, changed, turned into something else, and sent back out. We saw t-shirts that were supposedly worn by Pat Mahomes last year, and they were not even real. They had been photoshopped. So you have to really have a lot of thinking going on when you think about when did this come out and when did they write it? Was it years ago? Was it last week? And when did it appear? When's the first time? And the first time it appeared, where was it? Was it in a magazine? Was it on a widely known website? Was it nowhere really? And then somebody found it and pretended that it had been in those places, right? What was the website like that it was featured on? There are specific websites that have particular goals in mind. Some of those websites' goals are not to tell you the truth or the news, but to have lots of advertisements and lots of shock news that may make you go to the site, but the main goal of the website wasn't information. It was loaded with news ads for you to click on, and that's not something that you should ignore. Perhaps that's not the best website to trust. Okay, the last couple things you could think about when you're evaluating a source are who's the target audience for the publication? Back when we were a little bit younger in our days, we had more magazines that students might select from, and they were great examples of that. Different magazines seem to be targeting and working toward covering information for different audiences, right? A magazine called Cosmopolitan was primarily targeted toward upper middle class women, I believe. And then you could see how a magazine, something like People or Newsweek, was really not targeting a specific gender or ethnic group, but really people, even in of its title. You could think about how a magazine like Sports Illustrated, again, might have specific content, and we would wonder, is this more targeted toward men? Are there a larger readership in this audience? And so would articles appear there that would be different than they would appear in a largely targeted women's magazine? Okay, so that's important. Another thought is, what age group was this information intended for? And oftentimes there are things that people use not realizing that this was intended for an older or a younger audience, and they may have taken it out of context and used it, if it was written for young people, as something in their research paper when they were in college. Probably not the best choice, but it might be an interesting example for a different reason. Okay, the next thing you're going to evaluate is the purpose. And if you can tell me the purpose of what someone wrote, that means you've read it enough to discover, and you can think about why then you would include it in your own research paper. Until you can decide what the purpose is, you really need to digest more of the material, because the purpose might be purely entertainment, but you didn't realize it and you used it as if it were factual. The purpose might be persuasive and have a lot of bias and opinions that you hadn't realized might be a part of the influence of why the person's saying it the way they are. So taking that to heart is understanding the purpose and the goal of the author is definitely an important way to decide if it should go in your research paper and if the information you're finding is reliable, accurate, or trustworthy. Because the last thing to consider is called the speaker's attitude. And a lot of things are written to be comical or humorous. A lot of things are written that are intended to be purely offensive. It's important to really start to think about the goal of the author and the attitude that that author might have used toward that topic. That's called the tone. And having a deep understanding of this could really help you understand if this is a good non-biased resource for you to use in your research if you're trying to prove things of a factual nature. Okay, was the goal at all influenced by politics or a different agenda? And that is something to think about when you think about where a source comes from or where it was published. Okay, that is a lot of information to take in, but I know it's important. And I know that when you're out there swimming on the stream of all the information that's possibly available, some of your most important questions would be, how do I know it's trustworthy? Let me show you an example of me going through this very process with my research question. This is my buddy Shadow, who's actually right over there, and I'm making him wait a few extra minutes. Thanks, bud, because 11 is when he eats lunch. But we're here home doing our video, so he's just being patient with me. But my question was, what efforts should be in place as a new dog owner to best ensure a happy home? Here is how I decided to find my first and best resource as the first attempt to collect some reliable information about this question. I found the American Kennel Club. Notice that it's all ready to tell me how long ago it was founded. And this gives me a little bit of faith in that it's probably been doing some pretty good work if it's been around for 135 years. Okay, another way I could discover that would be something I want you to tell me. So let's take a second here and think about your research question. Let's go out and see if you can find any source that would somehow go with your research question, and then together we're going to fill out SOAPS and make a decision if this is a reliable or trustworthy source. Here's how I made the decision based on the American Kennel Club. Okay, the speaker was the American Kennel Society. It's important to know that it's made up of doctors and veterinarians, so everyone that I'm getting my advice from are the people that have done their study. The occasion is important because this isn't a website that came out 100 years ago. There wouldn't have been a possible way for that. But it's updated often so that it's accurate. It's also a national website, which means that a lot more people reference it than just people in Kansas City, so it might be something that I can trust more sometimes. The audience, no one's going to this website to buy anything. There are no pop-ups, and there's no chance for me to really go anywhere else but just be on this website and find information. That tells me it's dedicated only for pet owners who are seeking this expert advice. And it's nice sometimes to find that you could find somewhere that doesn't have all the attempt to get you to be their customer. The purpose, simply to provide accurate information, and amazingly enough, it's not charging anything, which is another really nice thing. A lot of websites that end in .org, their main goal is simply providing information as a service and a product back to the needs of the world we live in. So they're often non-profits when they end in .org. Okay, and the final thing I noticed is there is no bias or slant on how to raise a blue heeler pup when I go on this website. It gives me pure information and it speaks in a more scientific tone. Okay, so that's been my example of my first effort to do some research. You know what? I'm going to call that a trustworthy source and give it a thumbs up. Your next session, we're going to talk a little bit about how you might organize this information as a form to support what we're going to develop is a thesis statement.